So very good morning, everyone. Today, welcome to the fourth day of the event, that is online faculty development program on recent advances in biosimilars development, where the first session, the speaker is Dr. Srinivas Savale. Um, as a brief background, Dr. Srinivas is the CEO of AIC LMCP Foundation, Ahmedabad, which is an Atal Incubation Center focusing on pharmaceutical and healthcare sector, hosted by LM College of Pharmacy, Ahmedabad, and supported by AM Niti Aayog, Government of India. He is an acknowledged leader with over 22 years of professional experience in drug research, development, and compliance in pharmaceutical organizations, CRO setup, and academia. He has expertise in the areas of regulatory bioanalysis, biopharmaceutics, and early clinical development, including bioequivalence for small molecules and biosimilars or biologicals, and with various GLP, GCP, GMP complaints, including data integrity, gap analysis, and resolution for electronic data workflow and IT systems in GPX environment, CRO, vendor qualification, electronic solutions deployment for automation of bioanalytical and clinical laboratory workflows, clinical workflow, and has been supporting pharmaceutical organizations and CROs in these areas. He has been part of various startup and innovation related initiatives at LM College of Pharmacy, such as a member of committee and mentor for SSIP and incubation center representative of IIC. He was also an adjunct professor, quality assurance in MPharm and PhD courses, and he was associated with the Torrent Pharmaceuticals Limited as general manager, bioevaluation, and the Clinigene International Limited, as previously as Syngene International, as head bioanalytical research, and Torrent Research Center as scientist 2 at Medicinal Chemistry Division. He has received his PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences from Gujarat University, Ahmedabad. He served as the track screening chair, bioanalytics, chemical entity, abstract screening committee, AAPS Form Sign 360, AAPS 2018, member steering committee and member of clinical PKPD subcommittee, biosimilars focus group, AAPS abstract screener, and AAPS annual meetings, etc. He is the chair, Gujarat chapter at Society for Pharmaceutical Dissolution Science in India. He has been a reviewer for various national and international scientific journals, invited speaker at various national and international conferences, and has 21 publications, a book chapter, and many scientific presentations to his credit. With this background, I invite Dr. Srinivas Savale for delivering a talk on clinical development of biosimilars. Over to you, Dr. Srinivas.
Thank you, Dr. Somsundar, and I thank NIPER Kolkata for organizing such an important faculty development program. I'm sure all of you are doing good in this challenging time, and I hope that we continue to do our best even in this pandemic situation. So you already have been going through this course for this is the fourth day, and I'm sure you would have developed good understanding about biologics and biosimilars. So what I'm going to in next hour or so is to walk you through the clinical development requirements for biosimilars. However, this is the outline of my talk. So we look at some of the top drugs in 2020, and I'll tell you the reason why I'm looking at that. Then I'll again just refresh you on biosimilars and various terminologies used for biosimilars across the globe, and walk you through the biopharmaceutical research and development process, which is very important, though it follows something similar path as that of the small molecule drug research and development, but it adds its own challenges and different gestations for different activities. So then we'll go through the nuances or the differences between clinical development for an innovator biopharmaceutical product versus a biosimilar, and what are the key steps or the pathways through which the biosimilar development takes place. I'll also discuss some of the clinical investigation aspects, especially pharmacokinetics for therapeutic proteins, and also we will look at what is required when we are actually establishing biosimilarity and interchangeability of biosimilars with respect to the clinical pharmacology, PKPD studies. I'll just try to use the laser pointer for the ease. And then I'll walk you through a couple of case studies, one of the innovator biologic, one of the biosimilar product, and how the vaccines are getting developed these days. So, and further, why the biosimilars are making news and kind of these days it is very much in talks is the cost advantages that they bring for otherwise it is a far-fetched or very costly therapeutic modality that is biologics which a common patient may not afford. And finally I'll summarize on the talk today. So if you look at this slide, these are the top 15 drugs by sales in 2020. And if you look out of these 15 drugs, 10 drugs are of biological origin or they are biologics. So all these red stars are actually the biologics and they have the biggest say in the top sales of the pharma drugs. So if you look at Humira continues to be the leader with $20.4 billion of sales in 2020. So that has actually, this trend has been there for last 5 or more years, where majority of the top 15 to 20 top 15 to 20 drugs are the biologics. So it's very important to see how these therapies can be brought to the common patient. So, as I was mentioning, while these particular top drugs that we saw are making good money, but there is a lot of pain going behind when we are actually uh, uh, bringing a new biological entity to the market, and then the subsequent biologics, which are the, you can say, typically they are said as similar biologics. So, if you look here, as all of us know that any drug for that matter goes through these phases. So where you have plethora of compounds or candidates in the beginning at the basic research and at the drug discovery phase, and then they are kind of uh, getting into the funnel where those which are not suitable, those candidates get weeded out. And preclinical phase actually uh, kind of establishes the evidence in the preclinical environment. And then also the most important is looking at the safety aspect of these candidates. So once they make it uh, preclinically, you can say selected candidates, they get into the development phase, that is clinical development phase. So after preclinical, you are intending to file an investigational new drug application. Now, most of these terminologies are coined by US FDA, but globally they are understood in the same language. So I'm using the same term. So once you file an investigational new drug application, so you give your clinical development program to the regulators and you walk the candidate through various phases of clinical trials, right? So initially you do initial safety testing in small number of volunteers. They may be healthy or patients. That's the phase 1 study. And then you move on to the proof of concept or phase 2 and phase 2B kind of trials or phase 2 trials, where you are assessing the safety and efficacy in small group of patients. And subsequently, when you get promising outcome, you are moving on to the phase 3 clinical trials where you are demonstrating safety and efficacy in large group of patients, that is thousands of patients or the target population. And once you have substantial clinical evidence on safety and efficacy, you are going for the new drug application or biological license application submitted to the regulatory authority for marketing authorization. And once you get favorable review from the regulatory agency, you are launching your product. You get the FDA approval and you are getting into the market. But then our commitment doesn't end at the approval, right? So we keep continuing monitoring the safety even after post-marketing. So one has to keep collecting data even after marketing to see that real time the drug also has the same efficacy and safety. So this becomes very critical in case of biologics. And as you may agree that clinical development for biologics is a stepwise development and differs from case to case. So it's not that one shoe fits all in case of biologics. Uh, for small molecules, most of the times you will have a similar pathway, but in biologics, based on the nature of the biologic, you may have different approaches for clinical development. So from biologic, when we are coming with a similar biologic, I'm just putting these definitions for refreshing what you have learned. So different regulatory agencies are using different terminology, but they mean the same, right? So when I say a biosimilar, it's a new, actually, it's a similar biological product, right? Which has to be similar to a licensed reference medicinal product. So this was EMA being the pioneer in getting into regulations or guidelines for the biologics. This was the simplest understanding of a biosimilar. So it's a similar biological medicinal product as that of the reference medicinal product. But when it comes to US FDA's definition, there is little more elaboration, which also talks about such a product is developed by a different sponsor after patent expiry or exclusivity expiry of the innovator product. And the underlying expectation is the following biologic has to be highly similar to the reference biologic product, right? And it should not be withstanding minor differences in clinically inactive components, and for which there are no clinically meaningful differences between the biological product and the reference product in terms of safety, purity, and potency of the product. This is a very important statement. The moment we say no clinically meaningful differences, so everything boils down to the safety and efficacy of the biologic that we are bringing as a follow-on biologic. So it's very important that you generate a clinical evidence where you indicate that the biosimilar has no significant difference as far as safety and efficacy concerned with respect to innovative product. So these are other terminologies like similar biotherapeutic product or subsequent antibiologic or similar biologics as we call in India. So it is very important to understand this particular segment of products, biosimilars, right? So they are actually falling in between the small molecule generics and biologics. So if we look from these four important considerations, scientific difficulty, time required to from development to market, development to market, but time as well as cost, and the manufacturing process. So in case of biosimilars, as we can see here, as they are biologics, they are scientifically challenging, right? So the time taken is about 8 years for taking to market. Then the cost is about $200 million, and always the manufacturing processes are complex. So one needs really deep scientific skills and strong understanding of manufacturing process to get the successful biosimilar to the market. So when we look at the clinical development aspect for a biosimilar, what is required to establish as far as the clinical similarity is concerned? So here, if you look at this last particular column, when I say biosimilarity, biosimilarity is not only clinical comparison. It is quality, that is analytical and biological activity comparison, non-clinical comparison, as well as clinical comparison. But I am restricting to clinical component because I have, like as the title of the talk says, I'll focus more on the clinical development. So here, if you look at, so you need to do a lot of pharmacology studies, which involves pharmacokinetics and dynamic studies. Now here also you will see a color difference. So all those studies written in gray color, they are for innovator biology. Also the green one, and the green ones are for the biosimilars, right? So we're not getting into the de novo single dose, repeat dose, or special population studies for biosimilars, but we do comparability studies, single dose PK studies in most of the cases. Sometimes it is multiple dose studies as well. And when it comes to pharmacodynamic studies, so we are comparing the specific pharmacodynamic marker with the innovator to prove the comparability, PD comparability. And when it comes to the efficacy and safety in the target population, one also needs to establish comparability for the biosimilar for a specific indication as that for the innovator. And there is commitment for post-marketing both for the innovator biologic as well as biosimilar. So when we are talking about a biologic or biosimilar product, there are certain immunogenic manifestations that we see, and one has to have post-marketing surveillance even if you want to further go for different indications for the biosimilar. So in the entire development path, if you look at the key steps, so like of course the analytical and biological activity comparison phase is also quite elaborate, or the most exhaustive phase. But then the time consuming phases are like you have preclinical phase where you are doing abbreviated talks, efficacy and safety study. But the clinical development phase is the longest one. It can take anywhere between 1 year to 5 years. 3 years to 5 years when you are establishing PK/PD similarity by doing phase 1 and phase 2 studies. So where you may engage the sensitive population. Sometimes even healthy subjects are used in phase 1 study, and then the efficacy or the safety in the uh, target population. So that's where here, when you talk about phase 3 studies, again, they are not that full-fledged studies, but here, because the purpose is to uh, demonstrate that the safety and efficacy is similar to innovator product. So you may just get into a sensitive indication, and the trial design would be such that you have certain clinical trial endpoints which can be then compared with the innovative product. And of course, you keep generating additional data in the post-approval phase. So just to compare how this entire biologic development path works for an originator biologic and a biosimilar. So this figure is quite explicit in terms of showing different phases of development of a biosimilar, where you already have reference biological products understanding or a lot of knowledge you have generated when you are developing a new biologic, and you build on that particular knowledge for bringing a similar product, right? So you have defined the target, then when you talk about development of the product, you are actually developing the product as well as process. And then uh, the biggest requirement here is to establish the comparability with the reference product. So that's where you will see that the developmental efforts for new biologic, it is very heavy on the clinical side. Majority of time and efforts are going into clinical phase for a new biological product. But when it comes to biosimilar, it becomes reverse. So you have abbreviated clinical programs where you are more focusing on the establishing the similarity of safety and efficacy. So that's exactly what happens is actually in case of original product, we are looking at showing that the new molecule has significant clinical benefit, but that is not the case for biosimilar. So we are more interested to demonstrate that the molecule is essentially same as that of the reference product, right? So that's where the development path and development strategies shift upside down. But the probability of success of biosimilars is comparatively much higher as compared to a new biologic product. So as I already mentioned, the development for biosimilar is of course case by case. So I'm not sure if you have kind of you got to know about various regulatory pathways for biologics the last 3 days, but if you look at European Medical Agency, EMA, EMA has come up with some of the product-specific guidelines, and those product-specific guidelines tell you different clinical strategies for a specific class of compounds. So broadly, you will have to establish comparability, both analytical and biological activity. I think there was one talk a couple of days back on the analytical similarity aspects. And you are also conducting non-clinical studies. I think yesterday Dr. Somsundar spoke on this, where you have abbreviated tox studies and for the specific models you use and establish comparability. And then when you move to clinical phase, that's where you end up in doing different types of clinical studies, right? So you have pharmacokinetic studies in which you will look at the safety of this biosimilar product and also the PKPD similarity in either healthy subjects or the patient population. So one has to compare these PKPD aspects with the reference product through this phase 1 study. You also undertake pharmacodynamic studies. Now it is very important to identify the right PD endpoint or pharmacodynamic endpoint. Sometimes some of the biomarkers which are representing the pharmacodynamic effect need to be chosen very cautiously. So this is very important when we are designing a PKPD study. Then you go for the phase 3 comparability, where you are looking at similar efficacy and safety in patients. And again, you cannot just take it for granted that whatever indications the innovator has claimed is applicable to your biosimilar or the follow-on biologic that we are bringing. So one has to also show the comparability in proposed indications of use. So as I already mentioned, the pharmacodynamic markers, one has to again prove with these markers that the biosimilar has similar or lower adverse event incidence as compared to innovator. And you are also looking at immunogenic manifestations. So comparison of immunogenicity is very important. So one has to prove the similarity, whether the immunogenic manifestations are with or without clinical consequences. And then, so when we're talking about immunogenicity, there is a commitment for any biologic or biosimilar manufacturer towards the commitment given to the regulatory agency that you have to have comparability established, especially in case of repeat administration biosimilars. And one has to have at least 12 months immunogenicity data available and commitment for another 2 years of monitoring the immunogenic manifestations when it is in the market. So one has to ensure that you minimize unnecessary switching between the products, that is the innovator and the biosimilar product, not even innovators for that matter, unless you have established the interchangeability, which I will explain you in few minutes. So it is very important for this entire program or entire development that you have complete traceability when you are doing pharmacovigilance for this kind of products. So ultimately, you are collecting the evidence generated at different phases, be it analytical, be it non-clinical, clinical, or even post-marketing. And this evidence is looked at in toto when you are trying to establish biosimilarity, or when the regulator uh, gives you approval as a biosimilar. So it is it is imperative that we establish similarity in all phases or all steps. So it's not that you find the clinical comparability, but there is some uh, differences, certain differences found at the analytical stage, or sometimes it so happens that at the analytical stage you are not able to pick the differences because of several limitations of the technology available, or so on and so forth. So totality of evidence is the concept where all these comparability exercises are viewed collectively, and a decision is made on what can be the clinical implications in terms of safety and efficacy when biosimilar is being used. And when it comes to extrapolation of an index, extrapolation of uh, any indication, one just cannot uh, take it for granted that all the claims made by innovator, the biosimilar manufacturer also can make. So because of the uncertainty embedded due to difference in the manufacturing processes, or and the entire development, you can say product development, we look at the process, we look at the packaging, so on and so forth. So you cannot just take for granted that it is exactly the same. And even you can look at the efficacy and safety at the target population to compare that with the innovator. So if you are launching a biosimilar for one specific indication, you may have to generate evidence to support that it will work on the other indication also, where the innovator is claiming the uh, advantage. So as I was talking about immunogenicity, I will get little more into details because this is the most critical safety concern as far as the biopharmaceuticals are concerned. So immunogenicity is nothing but it is a propensity of a therapeutic protein product to generate immune response to itself or to related proteins, or to induce immunologically related adverse clinical events. So this is the, since most of the biologicals, they are taken as antigens, or the, they the body develops certain defense mechanism against it. So sometimes there are several factors from the biological product which are responsible for immunogenic manifestations. So some of them are like impurities in the final product, structural modifications due to manufacturing process, different route of administration may have different kind of expression of immunogenicity. So it is always important that when you are making a comparability claim, you always have comparability in terms of immunogenicity as well. And as you can see here, especially when this biologic or biosimilar is recommended for repeated administration. So, as I already mentioned, there is a commitment for doing post-marketing surveillance, and one has to also look at, for example, if you identify immunogenic potential for the particular biosimilar and it, it actually gives potential risk, then one also has to make a risk mitigation plan. So how will you overcome the unwanted immunogenic manifestations when the treatment is being taken by the patient? And it is a big challenge to have validated assays which can detect the immunogenicity or which can actually tell you uh, how immunogenic that particular biosimilar is. So based on the outcome from these validated assays, one can correlate uh, the immunogenicity with the PKPD components. So you always have correlation with PKPD efficacy and safety when you come up with a biosimilar. And some of these safety concern that you can see here is you get hypersensitivity reactions, sometimes infusion reactions, that is at the site of action, autoimmunity, and loss of efficacy. So one has to be doubly sure that the immunogenic potential is similar to that of the innovator product. This is just to give little further insight on what are different factors that may cause immunogenicity, because this is another important aspect of the clinical development program. So it is not what happens at the end when the clinical study is being done, but there are certain factors which are related to the product, such as so whether the protein is native human protein or there are degradation products, different types of modifications that have been done, changes in the glycosylation, formation of aggregates, and so on and so forth. So it is important that, as you know, the smallest change in the amino acid sequence can change the entire, fate of the biological or the biological product. So the product itself can bring in these variations, which may lead into immunogenic manifestations. There are certain process-related factors, like, for example, the storage conditions, then the container closure systems that are being used, uh, then the column leachables, like for the upstream when you are doing basically purification, you are using different types of columns, and chances are there are certain leachables those are coming out during the purification process. Some of the reagents or even the medium and antibiotics that are being used during the process, and host cell proteins. So these can be some of the uh, process related parameters or the factors that may lead to immunogenicity. Then there are patient related factors in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So it is important to actually, when you are looking at comparison of immunogenicity, all these factors are taken into account. And of course, there are disease state related and treatment related factors. So just as I was telling about route of administration, so IV route, as you can see here, this arrow, actually I forgot to tell you, the risk is also indicated by different colors here. So green is low risk and red is the high risk. So these factors are also given here in the, you can say they are graded with respect to the risk of immunogenicity that they bring. So single dose is always less immunogenic as compared to multiple dose, and IV route is supposed to be the least immunogenic as compared to the intramuscular and subcutaneous route. And concomitant immunosuppressive therapy also is taken into account, which may lead to immunogenicity. So all these factors, so when I'm designing a specific clinical development program, I need to look into it, and that's why the totality of evidence concept is taken. So if you find certain differences at the analytical comparability or the biological activity comparability or even the non-clinical comparability studies, you have to be cautious when you are getting into the clinical development program. So as I was telling you about totality of evidence, you are actually taking into account all the evidences that you have generated in the different phases of development of bias. So, but when it comes to extrapolation, like extrapolating the indication or adding additional indication for a particular biosimilar, one has to have scientific justification to support this extrapolation, especially for the indications and uses which are not studied clinically. Now, here you have developed a biosimilar and you want to extrapolate to another indication. So it's always expected to that we generate a convincing non-clinical evidence to support this extrapolation, right? And when you are talking about the indication or the mechanism of action for a specific indication, then one has to actually generate even clinical evidence that the biosimilar will have similar effect or efficacy and safety for a different indication as that is claimed by the innovator product. It's very important to take into account all comparability at all stages. So when it comes to US FDA, so they give two types of designations to follow-on biologic. One is biosimilar, where broadly there is no clinically meaningful difference between the biologic product and the reference product. Of course, that is in terms of safety, purity, and potency. But can this biosimilar be used as a interchangeable, or can you switch from one biosimilar from innovator to a biosimilar? So US FDA doesn't allow by default switching from biosimilar and innovator, but you need to get a designation called as interchangeable. Your biosimilar is interchangeable. And what does that mean? That means that this biosimilar product will produce same clinical result as that of the reference product in any given patient. Now this is a challenge. So one has to actually see to it that even if there is a switch from uh, from the biosimilar to innovator and innovator to biosimilar, so there is no impact on the safety and efficacy of the particular treatment. So if you can establish this, then it can be substituted for the reference product by the pharmacist without the intervention of the prescriber. So that's the interchangeable designation. And you can see all this information in Purple Book. So approval of novel biologic or a biosimilar. It also tells you about the exclusivity and the status, whether the biosimilar is an interchangeable biosimilar or just a biosimilar. And so anyone who wants to get the understanding, it is published in Purple Book. Orange Book is mainly for the small molecule products. So in fact, we along with some of the scientists from Sandoz and others, we did publish a cover article for AAPS News Magazine, basically to kind of give an overview of clinical pharmacology studies which are required for supporting demonstration of biosimilarity and interchangeability. Now, the interchangeability guidance also has come up, which is extremely sorry. So now the interchangeability guideline also is finalized by FDA 2019. Now I want to get little deeper onto what are exactly what kind of data or what kind of studies are required. Uh, some guidances that have come up through the USFDA or even EMA. So when you talk about therapeutic proteins, so it is always a challenge to study the pharmacokinetics of the protein products. Sometimes most of these proteins are endogenously available, and depending on the way they are manufactured, so you expect some dissimilarities in the PK behavior. Uh, so one has to develop a very thoughtful PK development program for the proteins. Now this is more from the when you are talking about a new biology, and you need to appreciate that the strategies of PK studies for uh, therapeutic proteins would be much different than the small molecules. And very important aspect comes is the bioanalysis. So all the PKPD measurements or all the PKPD decisions that you are going to make are depending on how robust is your bioanalytical support or bioanalytical methods that you are going to use. So methodologically, there are again multiple challenges when it comes to specificity of the assays or sensitivity of the assays. So you should be able to pick those specific proteins or even the biomarkers in the given matrix at with a specific confidence. So developing such assays and validating such assays to use for the PKPD studies is very critical. And for any novel biologic, broadly we look at the, of course, absorption disposition studies. Now, when you see absorption, the route of administration is very important. When we are talking biologics, the most preferred route of administration, of course, the parenteral route, right? And then IV or, I mean, intravenous or intramuscular or subcutaneous, intranasal or pulmonary. So these are the common routes of administration for these therapeutic proteins. So one need to study absorption through a specific route. And when it comes to disposition, again, we need to look at the dose and time dependency of a specific therapeutic protein. And binding to blood components. We also look at any chemical modifications to proteins which may change the PK or PD outcomes of specific biology. Of course, the variability, inherent variability for a biologic product, as we all know, that it is not as what do you say strict limits or specifications that you see for small molecules. So you will expect a lot of variation even for the same product from batch to batch. And when you are thinking of the population, here also you need to take into account the variability. So when I'm choosing a specific population for these studies, one has to keep in mind the renal and hepatic status of these subjects. And we are very familiar with the drug-drug interaction studies that are done in small molecules, but that also needs to be established when you are talking about therapeutic proteins. So as we see here, even the data that is generated through these studies, typically for conventional products, we are using this compartment and non-compartment analysis. But sometimes for this specific covariate relationship, we may have to go for population pharmacokinetic analysis, especially for the therapeutic proteins. And even you may end up doing some of the PK and PK analysis in phase 2 or 3 studies using sparse sample approach. This is not very common in the small molecules, but it is used for therapeutic protein. And of course, important to establish the correlation of PK and PD. PK-PD relationship studies are recommended, and they are required also when you go for seeking the regulatory approval. Immunogenicity studies are must, and then, as I already mentioned, you also look at linking the immunogenicity manifestation with the PK/PD. And then for biosimilars, of course, we are looking at comparability at the clinical study. So let us look at specifics about the PK/PD studies. So these are the early clinical development studies for any biosimilar. So the FDA guidance actually takes into account that these studies are critical. Now you have established analytical similarity, biological activity similarity, and then non-clinical similarity. And now you are looking at any small differences in those exercises may have any clinical implications. So the clinical PK studies are the first step to understand such uncertainty which may be translating into clinical manifestation. So it is very important to have such studies in the program, and when you are developing this clinical pharmacology data, one has to judiciously look at the study design, reference product, study population, dose selection, route of administration, what are the PK measures, what are the PD measures that we are taking, and defining the appropriate PD assessment plan. So what are those specific PD markers we are targeting, and what value addition or what information you are seeking from those markers. And of course, you are ultimately looking at the statistical comparison of PK and PD. So as I was emphasizing, the analytical quality and similarity becomes the foundation for any clinical development program. So if you see any differences or uncertainty at the analytical phase, but you may still go for clinical comparability stage, keeping in mind the what has happened during the cleaning. When you are looking at the analytical comparison. So again, analytical comparability is again at 4 different levels, right? So the analytical similarity may not be sufficient, or analytical similarity has some uncertainty or residual uncertainty, or you may have tentative similarity as far as analytical characteristics are concerned, or you may have fingerprint like analytical similarity. Now, if I am going with clinical development for these 4 categories of similarity, of course the risk involved is different. Also, the strategy for clinical development may differ depending on what differences are there and to what extent these differences are there. So it is very important to look at appropriate study design. And when I am designing a study, it is important that that study should give me best sensitivity to pick any small differences in the clinical outcome of the biosimilar and the innovator, right? So one has to look at what are those parameters in a study design which will provide me this capability. So when you are talking about PK similarity and doing a single dose, typically you are doing a randomized crossover study for the products with the short half-life, and you may go for parallel group design when the product has a long half-life. Now, when I'm looking at a single dose study, I'm also looking at a rapid PD response, right? Short half-life biology, if I want to also look at the PD, so there has to be a rapid PD response and or low anticipated incidence of immunogenicity, right? So when I'm going for a crossover study, I'm expecting low immunogenicity potential for those candidates. And I may go for parallel group design if I have this long half-life biologic or an increased immune response that affects the PK or PD similarity assessment after repeated exposures. So most of the times, if it is seen in specific disease conditions, then uh, for diseases that exhibit time-related changes associated with the drug exposure. So you are looking at relationship between the PK and PD or dose response relationship when you are going for such products with long half-life and higher immunogenicity potential. And when it comes to PD similarity studies, again, one would do multiple dose studies when the PD effect is delayed, or otherwise they can do the same through a single dose PK study also. And the moment I say about a biosimilar, choosing the right comparator is must as far as the regulatory approval is concerned. So US allows you to use, I mean, basically USFD will expect you to use US comparator product, but in the absence of that, you can use any available reference product. However, if you want to kind of use another reference product along with the US reference product, then you need to design a study in such a way that you are trying to establish similarity with both the US innovator as well as other innovators. So it may become a three-way equivalence trial. You have two innovators and one comparator. Or if you have established similarity with the other innovator product, then you have to do again a comparability study with the US innovator or a bridging study where you can prove that the biosimilar has same clinical safety and efficacy as that of US innovator as well as say European innovator. Again, the population is very important. Which population to choose, whether to go for healthy subjects or whether to go for patients. So there are certain thumb rules. So if there is a safety concern, you will not go for healthy subjects. If there are no safety concern, healthy subjects is the sensitive population. And especially lower inter-subject variability is observed when we are doing studies in healthy subjects. But for patients, generally, if there is safety or ethical concern around this particular biology, or if the PD biomarkers are relevant only in that particular patient population, then one should go for patient PKPD studies. Now again, selecting the right dose. So the most sensitive dose needs to be selected again, where you can see the difference, right, between the PK and PD. So if you are doing a patient-based study, approved dose for the reference product is used. And when you are going for clinical pharmacodynamic study using any of these PD biomarkers or study in healthy subjects, one has to go for a lower dose on the steep part of exposure response curve. So when we are talking about dose response relationship, so you should go for lower dose of this dose response relationship if you are doing study in the healthy subjects. And again, as I already mentioned, route of administration also needs to be same when I am comparing biosimilar with innovative product. And if more than one route of administration is approved for the reference product, then most sensitive route, that is usually subcutaneous or other extravascular route of administration, is preferred. So this is the kind of consideration that goes when you are designing a study to establish biosimilarity. And when you are arriving at an endpoint, so what are the endpoints to compare? So most of the times they are similar as far as PK is concerned, similar to small molecule endpoint comparisons. So for single dose studies, like primary endpoint for bioequivalence is typically AUC 0 to infinity for intravenous administration and Cmax and AUC infinity for subcutaneous administration. So these parameters are compared and they're expected to be the 90% confidence intervals are expected to be between 0.8 to 1.25. And when it comes to multiple dose studies, the primary endpoint becomes AUC 0 to tau, right? So that is the area under curve from time 0 to the end of the dosing interval at the steady state, because it's multiple dose and you are not collecting extensive PK samples at every dose. So you are looking for the comparison at the steady state. And the secondary endpoint is Cmax and Ctrough at steady state. So it is a concentration prior to the next dose during multiple dosing. So this is used as a secondary endpoint. Primary endpoint becomes AUC 0 to tau, that is the dosing interval. When you talk for the small molecules, most of the times you have Cmax and AUC as the primary parameter. And AUC, when I say AUC 0 to T is the primary, but AUC 0 to infinity also is taken sometimes as a primary, and some regulations use that as a secondary parameter. So that is the difference when we talk about small molecule versus biosimilar. And also when you are doing the PD equivalence, there also the same criteria is applied. And one has to demonstrate similar exposure and response between the two products and assessment of clinically meaningful differences between the two products, right? So here you are doing clinical PK/PD studies and the data is compared and appropriate biomarker is chosen to assess the pharmacodynamic similarity. So I'm emphasizing on identifying right biomarker because it's possible that sometimes it's not only one biomarker, but you may need more than one biomarker to establish the comparison. Further, one can take into account different factors while selecting such a PD biomarker, right? So what are those factors? The first one is time of onset of change in the PD biomarker, right? So from the time of dosing, when the PD biomarker is kind of manifested. So then second is dynamic range of the biomarker over the exposure range of the biological product. So dose response relationship. How dynamic is this particular biomarker? So you have three biomarkers which represent a particular disease state, but biomarker 1 shows insignificant change, but biomarker 3 shows significant change with the exposure. Then biomarker 3 is more relevant, though biomarker 1 also represents that particular disease condition. So sensitivity of the biomarker to the differences between the two products. So that's what I was mentioning. Small little differences in the analytical or bioactivity comparison, or non-clinical comparison, that should be able to be taken into account when I'm looking for specific differences in the clinical outcome. So relevance of the biomarker with the mechanism of action. This is very important. So sometimes the biomarkers are dependent on the root, they are based on the mechanism of action of the drug, right? So you look at the reference product knowledge that has been generated, and based on that you can take a call. And analytical validity of the assays, I already emphasized on that. Oh, I'm again pushing the wrong key. Sorry. Yeah. And another important aspect of such study design is the time point and duration for the PD biomarker. Right. So one has to carefully select the biomarker which is relevant with respect to the time points that, or I mean, which uh, has been captured by elaborate uh, time of sampling or the time point scheme, so that you don't miss the behavior of the PD biomarker, right? When you are comparing, it is similar as what we do for small molecules. When you are comparing bioequivalence, you don't want to miss the times or the Tmax, or at which the maximum concentration is achieved. So you have systematic distribution of time points to get the right pharmacokinetic curve. Then PD time profile might not mirror the PK time profile. So that's where you need to have justification. So if there is no correlation in PK and PD, so you will have to justify. So as I already mentioned, all these clinical pharmacology studies will have the primary endpoints as PK and PD outcomes, and the secondary endpoints are safety outcomes. So those are immunogenicity and other safety aspects. Sorry. So when it comes to immunogenicity data, we are looking at uh, safety and efficacy. I mean, that data is linked with both the efficacy as well as the safety, other safety data that is there. So sometimes you may lose the PD effect of the efficacy. So that is due to the neutralizing antibodies that are being generated after administration of the biosimilar. Or sometimes it is immune mediated toxicity that would be expressed. And sometimes the incidence and the severity of such response needs to be compared when I am claiming safety and efficacy. So these are the common clinical PKPD studies that are required and the design considerations about establishing biosimilarity. Now coming to the next different designation, that is interchangeability. The clinical study design changes. So I have established with the clinical PKPD study that the biologic is similar to the innovator product. But to demonstrate, I can interchange the biosimilar with the innovator product. I need to establish a different study design, and because here the outcome expected is even if there is a switch from sorry. So even if there is a switch from innovator product to the biosimilar, there should not be difference in the clinical safety and efficacy outcomes. That's where one has to have descriptive endpoints of PK, efficacy, safety, and immunity. So this is an illustrative design. How can I establish interchangeability? So if you look here, at the start of the treatment, all the subjects are given the reference product, right? So this is also called as lead-in period of the treatment with reference product. After that, the, the subjects are randomized into two different groups. One group is given the test or the biologic following biology. Another group continues to be on the reference product throughout the study. But the first group undergoes, so this is the first switch from the reference product to test product. And then further again, the same group takes reference product. And again, at the last phase, this particular group again is given the test product. So here you will see that there are three switches: reference to test 1, test to reference 2nd, and reference to test again as the third switch. And the comparative group is always on the reference treatment. And now you compare PKPD immunogenicity for this particular study. So here, if you see that there is no significant difference in the safety and efficacy for this particular group as compared to the group on the reference, that's where you can say that the test, that is a biosimilar product, is interchangeable with that of the innovator product. So there are different terminologies that are being used: interchangeability, switching, automatic substitution, and substitution. So these are designations identified by different countries, and important is to understand the meaning because they are not synonyms. They have their own interpretation when it comes to understanding how a biosimilar can be used in the treatment. So substitution, here the pharmacist may dispense the biosimilar and no prior approval from prescriber is required. Automatic substitution, the pharmacist must dispense the biosimilar. Switching, again here the practice by the prescriber is like they have to look at the response of the patient, and based on they can switch from from innovator to interchangeable or interchangeable to innovator or within. And then interchangeability, we just saw that here the pharmacist can prescribe the interchangeable biosimilar. Like when a prescriber views that biosimilar has therapeutically interchangeable outcomes as that of reference product. So these are like different countries using these different terminologies. For example, Japan allows substitution. EU, the decisions on switching or substitution rely on national competent authority and are outside the remit of EMA. So regulatory body does not control it. So it is left to the national competent authority. So this is just to give perspective, because the moment I am talking about a particular terminology, the clinical development path is different. If I am looking for an interchangeable designation to the biosimilar, then the clinical development path is different, or the study requirements are different as compared to just getting a biosimilar designation. So there are several guidelines I'm just putting here for your knowledge. These are by US FDA, and you will see that 2019 interchangeability guideline was finalized, which was draft in 2017 earlier. And this is evolving. The regulatory science, regulatory understanding is evolving, and this will keep continuing to grow. So let me jump to some examples to tell you how it differs. The clinical development requirements differ. So filgrastim, as most of us know, is used for the treatment of neutropenia. It's a granulocyte colony stimulating factor, which was originally developed by Amgen, and this got approval in 1991. So when it comes to the clinical development data that Amgen has generated, so Amgen conducted phase 1 studies in specific patient population, non-myeloid malignancies, right? And they had to do dose dependence, dose range studies. So, and they observed that there is a dose dependent increase in the circulating neutrophil counts over the dose range of 1 to 70 microgram per kg per day. They also had to do PK studies with continuous infusion for 24 hours, that is single infusion, and multiple infusions. Right? So they had to look at the steady state serum concentrations to get the multiple infusion study outcome. So when these studies are being done, as I already mentioned, the PKPD became the primary endpoints, and the safety and immunogenicity as the secondary. And further, for confirming the indications, so they conducted several different trials. Amgen, like you can see here, 4 major trials that they have done is cancer. First trial was in cancer patients receiving myelosuppressive chemotherapy. Then for the patients with acute myeloid leukemia, which were receiving induction or consolidation chemotherapy. Then they also did a study in cancer patients who were receiving bone marrow transplant and the patients with severe chronic neutropenia. So the clinical phase is very exhaustive and elaborate when it comes to a novel or innovative biological product. But when we come to biosimilar, so I'm giving the filgrastim biosimilar, that is Zargio, launched by Sandoz, which is US's first approved biosimilar. So this particular biosimilar, of course, Neupogen was launched in 91, which is already in the WHO's model list. But when Sandoz came up with the copy product, uh, not exact copy, but I can say similar product, they had to do a lot of analytical comparison. So they did battery of structural and functional analysis to compare the Zargio with Neupogen. And they conducted 5 different animal studies through which they could assess the PD, toxicity, toxicokinetics, and local tolerance. But when it comes to clinical, it was quite abbreviated. So they had 1 pivotal and 4 supportive PKPD studies, which were done to prove that PKPD similarity is established with Neupogen. And they did 1 comparative safety and efficacy clinical study to assess the comparative efficacy. So typically when you talk about a biosimilar, so you are first looking at the analytical comparison, right? So this is the structure of, uh, GCSF, and you are looking at specific structural attributes when you are comparing. Then you are doing comparability of the primary structures, and here if you look at the specific uh, mapping graph, you will see that there are 3 different batches of Zargio, 2 different batches of US innovator, and one Neupogen batch from the EU innovator product. So you are always, as a biosimilar, when you are coming, and Zargio, I mean this Sandoz has launched this product in Europe also earlier, and now in US. So they had to compare with, as I was giving example of a bridging study. So you are giving comparison with different innovative products. And then you are looking at the clinically relevant attributes of your product. So like for example, when you are doing this chromatography, you are looking at certain peaks which are shown here, and what are these specific peaks attributable to when it comes to clinical outcome. And then finally you are looking at all different types of like structural similarity, functional similarity, looking at the PKPD. So here you have the absolute neutrophil count for the biosimilar and originator are compared, and you can see they are overlapping here. And then in the phase 3 clinical trials, you are looking at the efficacy and safety. Here the hemoglobin is used as the marker, and you are looking at the treatment duration. So here you are seeing that the hemoglobin count is gradually going up, which is similar to that of the originator. So that's how biosimilar comparability is established from all aspects, and totality of evidence is used. Now, these days we have been talking a lot about vaccines, right? So again, the vaccines, again, a different class of products and has a different strategy as far as clinical development is concerned. Right? So typically, the phase 1 clinical trials involve small groups of healthy adult volunteers. And in phase 2, again, the vaccine is given to the larger group of people who have characteristics similar to those for whom the vaccine is intended. Then phase 3 trials are done where thousands of such people are tested for efficacy and safety of the product. And then post-marketing surveillance is something which continues even after marketing this vaccine. Additionally, you will find that some of the vaccine development programs also have something called as human challenge studies. So these are the studies in which the vaccine is given, followed by the pathogen against which the vaccine is designed to protect. Right. So this is very uncommon actually, but like there have been talks in the media. You also must have come across that while development of COVID vaccines, so there were some applications for doing human challenge studies to the regulatory authorities. So this is just to give you a flip to whatever we are studying. Traditionally, we were talking about sequential clinical development, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and post-marketing surveillance. That's what exactly was happening even in vaccine development, right? So it used to take about 10 years to come bring the vaccine to the market. But in the pandemic, we have seen the response where all the stakeholders came together and they put in place something called as accelerated vaccine development. So most of the times we hear about adaptive clinical trials where the boundaries between these different phases of clinical trials diffuse, and you may have a continuous phase, like you can finish phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 can be clubbed to reduce the timelines and do interim analysis of the outcome so that you can take decisions for moving forward. That's exactly has been happening here for accelerated vaccine development. So you'll see that there is an overlap of different phases of clinical trial, phase 1, 2, 3. However, the phase 4 is quite elaborate because you have taken certain risk by abbreviating these phases of the clinical development, and then you still need to establish the safety, which is done after launching the product or taking it to the patients. So, but here you will say that instead of doing in sequence, most of the steps are done in parallel, and the phase 4 surveillance, especially for side effects, has been given a lot of importance. It's very critical and essential to establish. Now, we may wonder that most of these vaccines for COVID, what we saw, they are like innovator, Pfizer's and Moderna's, and all they are innovators for those particular vaccines. Now, you may wonder, can I have a biosimilar vaccine? And yes, it is possible to have biosimilar vaccine. Only thing is, again, the regulations have not evolved to the extent. Like, for example, nowadays we are talking about emergency use approvals of different medications, or repurposed medications, or even nowadays there is a talk of using monoclonal antibody cocktails to treat COVID. But by the time somebody comes with a biosimilar, it is a long path. So you current system talks about exclusivity and patent protection. So one has to dissolve these aspects if you really want to bring low-cost alternatives to the patients on a quicker turnaround. So just to give you a glimpse, though we are seeing that this is biosimilars looks to be a rosy landscape, but if you just see at this particular data, which was taken from 2019's data, this is that 5 out of the 17 FDA approved biosimilars have been launched in US. So you may wonder what happened to other biosimilars. So either they are not launched You will see 6 of the biosimilars have not been launched, and other 6 biosimilars, the launch is delayed. There may be multiple reasons for this, but those biosimilars which are coming in market, they are reaching to larger patients, and that's what exactly biosimilars are going to bring. Like we saw the clinical development strategies, so you can really bring these similar biologics to the patients, and which has huge cost impact, as we can see here. So it is expected that biosimilars will reduce the direct spending on biological drugs by $54 billion by 2026. Right? So this is a data for different types of biologics and their biosimilars that are coming in the market, and what is the cost erosion or the price erosion has happened, which is beneficial for more of the population. So just to summarize, as we know that biopharmaceuticals are the future new therapeutic class of modality, and biosimilars are coming into forefront because most of these biopharmaceuticals are nearing patent expiry. And though this is a scientifically and technically challenging area, this is also very cost intensive, but it is worth pursuing, as we know that small molecule libraries or small molecule pipelines are drying up for most of the companies. So to establish the biosimilarity, one has to do the comparability studies at different stages, and one has to prove that this biologic is having similar safety, efficacy, quality, and purity as that of the innovator product. So when the moment I say it will have similar safety and efficacy, one has to demonstrate that there are no clinically meaningful differences between the biosimilar and the innovator product. So clinical evidence becomes very essential if you want to establish extrapolation of indication or even interchangeability of a biosimilar with the innovator product. And actually, this is not only a simple peptide or therapeutic protein or monoclonal antibody, but we are talking about now complex biologics such as antibody drug conjugates or even the vaccines are quite complex. So they also bring different challenges in clinical development programs, and they make the regulatory pathway dynamic. So it is very essential that if you want to improve the global access to these biologics, there is a high time for streamlining the regulatory pathways so that you can give access to these modalities to the patients at large. With this, I thank you for your attention, and stay safe in this challenging time. So it's open for questions if any.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivas, for your detailed presentation and talk on this clinical development process and various factors involved in this. Thank you very much. I request the participants, if you have any questions, please post on the chat box. I think there are no questions. If further, if you have any questions, you are always welcome to post those questions by email. So we'll try to respond to those questions.
Sure. It's my pleasure to be part of this event. Thank you so much.
I got one question. is there a single source to get information regarding the regulatory mechanism of biosimilars?
You can get it, but single source for different regulatory agencies requirement you are asking, or a specific regulatory agency?
This is the question in India, he's asking. Yeah.
In India, yes, now the guidelines are pretty clear. In India, 2016, we have this new similar biologics guideline, which is very, very elaborate, and you get all answers to most of the questions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Srinivas, for your time and accepting our invitation to deliver an excellent talk on this clinical applications or clinical processes involved in biosimilars development. And for the next session, we'll join back at 11:45.
Sure. Thank you once again, Dr. Somsundar. I will
Thank you.
log off. Thank you.
Yeah. Closing the session, we'll join back at 11:45.